Forgive me for not introducing it. So, this morning, our text, as I indicated, is about a storm, or at least what happens in a storm. And so let me read to you from Matthew chapter 14, beginning at the 22nd verse. Immediately, he, Jesus, made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was alone there. But by this time, the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I'm going to ask Linda to move back one screen. We're going to look at this text in a little more detail immediately. Immediately after what? Just to remind us what's been happening before this passage in Matthew. Numbers of things. Number one, religious leaders are already plotting how they can get rid of Jesus because he's shaking things up and criticizing them, so they're plotting to kill him. Crowds are following him everywhere. They're hassling him, they're pushing him, they're relentless. They're shoving because they need what he has for them, which is truth, love, and healing. Especially, they want to be healed. It got so bad at times that he had to leave the crowds on the shore and get out in a boat to speak to them. Also, what else is happening? Jesus is having what we might call family issues. His mother and brothers want to speak to him. We read in some versions that they really didn't buy his ministry. They weren't really, they thought he was crazy perhaps, but anyway, he's not getting family support, shall we say. In fact, earlier in Matthew, Jesus says he goes to his hometown and he says only in his hometown, and then one of the other gospels says, and among his relatives is a prophet without honor. So Jesus is not respected, believed, revered in his hometown and perhaps even by his family. He's also just gotten this horrible news that his cousin John the Baptist was beheaded. We're not sure exactly the sequence of events, but the point is that in the previous verses in this chapter, it says he wanted to get away. When he heard this news, he wanted to go be by himself, but the crowds wouldn't let him. So what happens? He speaks to them and they're out in a remote place and they're hungry. And he says to the disciples, "Give them something to eat." The disciples say, "Are you crazy? We don't have anything. We have 5 loaves and 2 fish. And you know what happened. Jesus fed 5,000. Probably more than that because they don't usually count women and children in those days. So he feeds them. So that's what's happened before this immediately. So after the feeding, immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. I never really noticed this before, but doesn't it strike you kind of a little backwards that Jesus sent the disciples off? Actually, the word in the Greek is more like compelled or forced them into the boat. He didn't say, "Oh, how about you getting in the boat?" No, he said, "You need to get in the boat right now." And then he dismissed the crowds. You begin to wonder, which is weighing on him more, the crowds or the disciples? Because they're, often pretty clueless as to what's going on. So he was willing to take the crowds on his own. He dismissed the crowds, and then, of course, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. So, what do we have to learn from this passage? I've titled it Time to be Afraid. I don't think we don't have any evidence that he was ever afraid. We sense here he's exhausted. He's spent emotionally and physically, maybe exasperated, but not afraid. I can't believe. But whatever the situation, he knows he needs to get alone and pray. So to me, the first thing we need to see in this passage is the need to be alone. We have more quiet time. We have perhaps more opportunity to be alone, maybe not in this time of this virus, but we do need to get away from not just crowds, but even from other people, even from our closest friends and companions, even from our families. There are times when we just need to get alone to clear our heads and to pray. Because Jesus prays on the mountain before the storm, which will come next. Okay, so what else happens? Many of the commentators compare this storm to a storm earlier that Matthew talks about. In the other storm, Jesus was in the boat with the disciples and he was asleep. And they were frightened because they were afraid they were going to drown. And one thing that happens in both is that in the first case, in Matthew 8, they all cry out, "Save us, we're going to drown." And he says, "Oh, you of little faith, why are you so afraid?" And when he stills that storm, they say, "What kind of man is this? Even the winds and waves obey him." So now that had happened before this one. We don't see that the disciples are afraid in the boat from the storm. So either maybe it wasn't as big a storm, but also they already know that Jesus has power. It's just he's not with them right now. So they are afraid by what? They are afraid because they think he's a ghost. Some people think that because John the Baptist had been killed, maybe they thought Jesus had died and now was coming to them as a ghost. It doesn't matter what they think. We have no idea. Really, they were terrified. So is this the time to be afraid? When we see something that we've never seen before, when we see something we don't understand, when we see the unknown. The disciples weren't afraid of the storm. They knew what to do, just like Floridians know what to do when there's a hurricane coming. But COVID, this crazy virus, everything's all mixed up upside down. This is unknown. It's natural that we might be afraid. But one of the things that is so cool, I think, they cried out in fear, but immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, they're crying out in fear. They're terrified. But Jesus spoke to them, and you know what? They weren't screaming so loud that they didn't hear him. They heard him. He said, "Take heart. It is I. Do not be afraid." They heard him, and it sounds like they heeded him. They listened. So I think that's something else we can learn from this. We need to get alone. We need to pray before the storm, and even in the storm, in our fears, we need to be willing to listen. And then, next screen, Linda, please. Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." Okay, a lot of people think, oh, this is great. Peter gets out of the boat. Isn't he brave? Shouldn't we be like Peter? You know, we don't know exactly what was going on. Obviously, there are lots of different views as to why Peter might have said this. Some say, he was stepping out in faith. Some say, oh, wait a minute, if it is you, who questioned Jesus like that? Well, Satan did back when Jesus was tempted, if you're really Lord. The high priest questioned him, if it's really you. The mockers, when Jesus on the cross, questioned him. So there are those who think that this is not a movement of faith, but it's a movement of doubt or skepticism on Peter's part. Or there's another view, and this tends to be mine. I just think Peter is being Peter. He's hot dogging it. Hey, that looks pretty cool. If it's really you, let me come with you. Let me join you on the water. Maybe Peter just wanted to be close to Jesus. Maybe he just wanted the fun of doing something impossible. But Jesus, whatever Peter's motive, Jesus says, come. And I think we can take great heart in that. Jesus welcomes us. He bids us come. Whether we want to be with him or whether we want to do things out of good or bad motives, Jesus always welcomes us and bids us come. So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came towards Jesus. Pretty cool. But when he noticed the strong wind, I checked out some other translations. The Message says, when he looked down and lost his nerve. Obviously, what happened? He might have noticed the wind because he felt it, but don't you get the sense that he took his eyes off Jesus? He kind of looked around and said, this is pretty scary. What am I doing out here? He became frightened and beginning to seek. So here, is this a time to be afraid? I think so. If you're sinking in the water and it's a storm, I don't know if he knew how to swim. I assume he did, but it's a bad storm. He could still drown. He cried out, Lord, save me. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, you of little faith, why did you doubt? I thought as I was meditating on this passage of that song, turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. Obviously, Peter turned his eyes, I assume, away from Jesus. It's not a one-time thing that we go to Jesus, that we look at Jesus, that we trust in him in the midst of the storms and the fears. We have to keep turning our eyes to him. Because what about this guy, Peter? Jesus says, you of little faith, why did you doubt? What's happened to Peter previously? Earlier in Matthew, Jesus asked Peter, who do you think I am? And Peter says, you are the Christ. And then soon thereafter, before this storm, Jesus is telling them about his death and resurrection. And Peter argues with him and says, never, that can't ever happen. And Jesus says to Peter, get thee behind me, Satan. So Peter believes in Jesus, then he's arguing with him and doesn't believe what Jesus says. And then here we have this thing where in a minute he's going to say, truly you're the Son of God. And then soon after this passage, there's the transfiguration when Peter and the two others are with, James and John are with Jesus, and they see Jesus and they see Moses and they see Elijah in this incredible experience. And what does Peter say? This very variable Peter, he said, oh my gosh, let me build 3 shelters. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. I mean, how clueless can you get? So Peter is back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And what does God say to Peter, to all of them in the Mount of Transfiguration? This is my son, whom I love, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. That's what God says to us. That's what Jesus says to us. Listen to him. Those in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. Peter has little faith, perhaps. Peter is variable. He's on again, off again. But you know what? That's enough. When he cries out, Lord, save me, Jesus immediately reaches out his hand and catches him. I don't think he's rebuking him. I think there is a sense of amusement, but certainly affection. You have little faith, why did you doubt? Because, as he says later in Matthew's gospel, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, With the storms, we're going to be afraid at times, but we can have at least a little faith because Jesus is listening. He is there. He is the great I am. He is the Son, of the living God, God on earth. He always welcomes us. We can reach out and say, Lord, save me, because that little faith is always enough. Thanks be to God.